I'm Colin Sanders and this is the History Books Review, continuing my extended review of Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. This is Chapter 34, Part 2, and we're looking at the Huns invading the Balkans. With the Huns now united under Attila, it didn't take long before the changing balance of power made itself felt. The emissaries of Constantinople were summoned to Margus, a town on the north of the Danube, and insulted. They were obliged to negotiate on the saddle. The Huns refused to dismount. The annual tribute was increased from £350 of gold to £700 of gold. On top of this, a fine of 9 pieces of gold was imposed to cover Roman prisoners who had escaped from their Hun masters. Rebels from Attila had to be handed back. This last stipulation was not just blatant bullying, though it was that in spades. It also sent out the message that the Byzantines could not protect the opponents of Attila. The divide and rule tactics that had served the empire so well over the centuries would not work with this barbarian. It was also a reflection of the position of Attila, who was very much the leader of a coalition. He was wise to avoid allowing the Romans any advantage in peeling off allies from his side. But the changed situation didn't just affect the relationship between the Huns and Constantinople. The artful Genseric, who was at this time engaged in the creation of a Vandal kingdom in North Africa, was also able to turn it to his own advantage. His remarkable trick of seizing the richest provinces of the Western Empire was about to come unstuck. A large, well-organised Byzantine army was on its way to take control back, but somehow Genseric deployed diplomacy and persuaded the Huns to attack, and the army that could have been his nemesis was obliged to turn back. The barbarians hadn't just stolen the Romans' lands and treasure, they were stealing their ways of operating as well. The nominal cause for the outbreak of war was an incident in Margus. The Huns had stipulated that a large and free market would be held. They needed an opportunity to spend the money that they had just extorted from the empire. What better way than to oblige the empire to send its merchants and their goods to a spot convenient for the Huns to do a spot of shopping? But some sort of dispute broke out, and there was some fighting, in the course of which a Roman fort ended up being dismantled. There was also the affair of the Bishop of Margus. The Huns accused him of stealing some of their stuff. He denied it. The Huns disputed his denial and demanded that he was handed over. The Byzantines bravely refused. The Huns declared war and laid siege to Margus. This led to a rethink of just how valuable the Bishop of Margus really was to the empire, and the decision was made to hand him over anyway. He got wind of the plan and did his own negotiation with the Huns and came to a deal which involved opening the gates of the city to the enemy. Margus was captured by this betrayal. What happened to the bishop isn't recorded, but although this was an appallingly treacherous bit of behaviour, it hardly affected the outcome of the war. The Huns advanced on a wide front, some 500 miles wide, sweeping away Roman defences in the process. Cities without ecclesiastical fifth columnists were destroyed just as effectively by straight military means. Roman forces opposed the Huns in the field and were beaten in 3 set-piece battles. Theodosius II should have studied the tactics of his grandfather and namesake, who prudently avoided direct conflict with the barbarians invading the same territory, though whether even the great Theodosius could have done much against these much more ferocious adversaries is doubtful. Once the last Roman army had been defeated, the Huns had the run of the Balkans north of Greece, and could pillage with impunity up to the walls of Constantinople itself. The good sense of Constantine in founding the city, and the equally good sense of Anthemius in building substantial walls, was now apparent. For all their numbers, the Huns could not pierce the walls of the capital. They were technologically sophisticated and strategically positioned, and this combination saved the empire. But the citizens of the empire who didn't make it to Constantinople were at the mercy of the Huns. Well, mercy probably isn't the word here. The approach was much more pragmatic. Gibbon infers the behaviour of the Huns from that of the much later Mongols. This seems quite a reasonable thing to do. Descriptions of Attila make it sound like he was an Asiatic in appearance. Certainly the culture and technology of the Huns and that of the Mongols was very similar, so an account of how the Mongols dealt with their prisoners is appropriate. The Mongols would divide their prisoners into 3. The young and strong men would be immediately recruited or killed. The old, poor and useless were of no interest and were simply set free, literally beneath contempt. The young and attractive women, the wealthy who could be ransomed, and those with useful skills were divided up amongst the conquerors, who would treat them as the spoils of war, to be disposed of in the most profitable ways that could be contrived. The values of steppe nomads are not those of settled people. They were not remotely interested in the arcane skills of lawyers or theologians. They treated religious people with respect, and doctors with even more. Craftsmen might be useful too, according to their speciality. Attila himself secured an engineer who used to build himself a bath. Just because you're the scourge of God doesn't mean you can't invest in a bit of product to make yourself look good. But there was a difference between Genghis Khan's attack on Europe and the Attilas. The Mongols appeared out of nowhere. There was no warning, they just appeared over the horizon. Attila knew and understood the empire and was in continual contact with the key players. He seems to have enjoyed bullying them and catching them off their guard. Once the Balkans had been overrun and the Romans thoroughly beaten on the field, Theodosius sued for peace. The terms were a bitter pill for the once mighty empire. The protection money went up. A huge sum was demanded up front to defray the Huns' expenses during the war. After peace had been established, the Huns continued to turn up in Constantinople to discuss things that they wanted to and to receive lavish gifts. They were often surprisingly specific about what they wanted. The best example was the secretary of Attila. This was a man called Constantius, who had got the job via Aetius. His wish was for an attractive and well-off wife. Attila didn't offer healthcare, but the fringe benefits of working for him do sound worth having. It also shows that the Huns were pretty well integrated into the Roman way of doing things. As we'll see next time, there was quite a lot of diplomatic activity between the two, and it wasn't the sophisticated and urbane Romans who came off the better. I hope you can join me next time when we look at what the Romans saw when they visited the camp of Attila. And in the meantime, thanks for listening.